Welcome to In the Loop, Tales of the Blade, where we dive into the fascinating and often humorous history of figure skating. Let's introduce this week's hosts.
Hi, I'm Yogeeta. I know nothing about this week's topic, which is great because I didn't do any work for this episode whatsoever. You can find me on Twitter at Liliorum.
Hi, I'm Kite, and I'm squeezing in one last episode before disappearing to Asia for 3 weeks. You can find me on Twitter at MossyZink. So today is going to be our second episode of Tales of the Blade, which is a new series where we're going to dive into the history of figure skating. And so the catch here is that one of the hosts is going to be teaching the topic of the episode, and the other host does not know anything about the topic that is about to be taught to them. So this week we are going to be talking about Elaine Zayak, who has the dubious honor of having one of the best-known technical rules named after her. And we do have to warn you before getting into this episode that there is going to be some mention of eating disorders. So if that is particularly upsetting to you, then please refer to the timestamps for where to skip in the episode. So let's get right into it. Yogeeta, can you tell me what the Zayak rule is?
Oh god, I'm sure I could have told you this because it was relevant. So Elaine Zayak, from what I recall of like my 5 minutes of researching what the Zayak rule was when I first started watching figure skating, she won, I forget if it was like Worlds or the Olympics or something, by like just repeating the same jump over and over again. And so the rule was enacted after that, so you couldn't do more than 2 of the same type of triple or quad in the program.
Yeah, so that's basically the gist of it. So prior to 1982, there were no set rules on what jump layouts had to be in a figure skating competition. And afterwards was when the ISU adopted what is colloquially known as the Zayak rule, which states that skaters cannot repeat any jumps more than twice in a program, and that if they do choose to repeat a jump, one of them has to be in combination or sequence, which is where our best friend plus rep comes from.
Ah, yes, my good old friend.
So the Zayak rule has undergone some revisions since it was first introduced, and the most current version, which was enacted at the ISU Congress last year, states that skaters, primarily men, cannot repeat more than 1 type of quad in the free skate, and skaters can't repeat more than 2 jump types in the free skate, which was already like part of the rule before the ISU Congress last year. And so the rule is intended to encourage skaters to show a wider variety of skills, but it has met with some criticism and concern that it can cause skaters to risk their health or safety in attempting hard jumps that they might not yet be ready for. And although I feel like most figure skating fans who watch somewhat regularly are aware of the existence of the Zayak rule, and possibly that it's called the Zayak rule, but they may not know where it came from and the story of the skater behind it. So this is what I'm going to be teaching Yogeeta and all of you today.
Exciting.
So, brief intro into Elaine Zayak. She was born on April 4th, 1965 in Paramus, New Jersey, to Jerry and Richard Zayak. She actually began skating at the age of 3 as a form of physical therapy because she lost 3 toes in a lawnmower accident.
Oh my god, what?
And her doctor recommended that she start skating to ensure that she didn't develop a limp.
Is this all on 1 foot? She lost 3 toes on 1 foot?
Yes.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
How does she balance?
So she had to wear a specially supported boot to accommodate for the fact that her foot was shaped differently. And by the age of 6, she was training with Peter Burrows, who was also the coach of Dorothy Hamill, and with Marilyn Gelderman, who coached Sam Cesario, who won a couple pewter medals at U.S. Nationals in the past couple years. And so basically from the age of 6, she was training with the intent to be a figure skating champion. Her dad would drive her from their home in New Jersey to New York every day for practice and would give her $1 for every perfect jump that she landed. And she landed up to 50 a day.
Oh my god, that's insane.
Yeah, at that age, too.
She's just 6 at this point, right?
Yeah. Well, this continued, it seems, like, into her later career. But at the age of 6 was when she really started taking skating more, like, as a career than as a hobby. And her dad was like pretty gung-ho about her, becoming a ladies champion. We'll get into that too. So some background on the ladies field that Elaine Zayak was competing in. So prior to her, there were really no female figure skaters who were consistently competing with triples. Dorothy Hamill actually won the Olympics in 1976 with only doubles. And although all the triple jumps, aside from the triple axel, had been landed in competition by women, by 1978, the mentality towards them was that they were more jumps for quote-unquote men. But Elaine Zayak's father told her just because the guys are doing them doesn't mean the girls can't do them. And so what they really saw it as was if she could master a triple jump, then she would be able to win without much of a problem.
Wow, Elaine Zayak's father would get along really well with the Russian lady coaches.
And before 1980, the scoring system did not necessarily favor skaters who had a wide repertoire of jumps because compulsory figures were still in existence. And so compulsory figures were basically when the skaters would go out and just trace like figure eights and other patterns on the ice, and then judges would score how clean their patterns were and like how well they used their edges. And so it really favored skaters who had more experience competing and by definition were older. And so when competitions were composed of compulsory figures and then a short program and a free skate, the raw scores for each segment was tallied before the ordinal rank was determined. And so since there was such a wide range of scores possible for the compulsory figures portion, it was possible to take such a large lead after compulsory figures as to effectively win the competition, regardless of what happened in the short program and the free skate. And after 1980 was when the more familiar 6.0 system was established, so the skaters were ranked ordinally after each segment, and so this followed the diminishing of how much the compulsory figures counted towards the overall score. And so Elaine Zayak actually came of age at a time where it became more and more beneficial to demonstrate technical skill. And she was the first lady who really had like an arsenal of triples that she was landing consistently in competition, which we will get to. Elaine won Junior Worlds in 1979, 3 years after the event was created, which I actually did not know that Junior Worlds was such like a young event.
Huh, so what did juniors do before? Did they just like go straight to seniors?
I think that there was not an age restriction on skaters competing in seniors back in Elaine's day, so
I guess that would make sense.
But yeah, she actually moved up to seniors the following year, competed at Senior Worlds, where she placed 11th, and then the next year after that, she was second at Worlds.
Oh, wow.
So a pretty big jump up, obviously, for her. And she was like 15 when she won the silver medal at Worlds, so definitely considered a bit of a prodigy in her time. And then finally, in 1982, she won U.S. Nationals at the age of 16 and became world champion that same year. She landed 6 triples in her free skate, but 4 of them were triple toes. And so the ISU acted pretty swiftly. They actually passed the Zayak rule during the ISU Congress that same year, so basically like 3 months afterwards. And a quote from a fellow competitor kind of gives insight into the rationale behind why they passed this technical rule. So this person said, everyone was amazed by her ability to do those triples, but the knee-jerk reaction was, we can't have the sport become a jumping contest. It was new and different and amazing. She was so ahead of her time that I think people didn't know what to do with it. So definitely sounds familiar to some of the things that have been said in the wake of kind of the quad revolution, which I thought was really interesting. That back then it was, triples. Women jumping triples was considered like this trailblazing event, and now it's like there's junior girls like doing quadlutzes and stuff. It's pretty wild how far the sport has come in just like the past 30 years.
In a couple of decades, people will be jumping quints.
Don't say that. Why must you hurt me like this? This is a happy story.
Is it?
No. I mean, spoiler, it kind of does have a happy ending, in a bittersweet sort of way. After winning the 1982 World Championships, Elaine naturally became a favorite for gold at the 1984 Olympics, and her hometown even erected a sign at their city border which said, "Home of World Champion Elaine Zayak." And she was given a sports car, so definitely a lot of pressure being heaped on her. And remember, she was only 16 at the time, going into the 1984 Olympics, and everyone thought, well, 1984 is only 2 years away. She's basically a favorite for the gold medal with, her triple jumps and everything.
Regardless of the decade, we will always have too much media pressure on our athletes.
Agreed. But I feel like even in this day and age, you don't really see, like, towns putting up signs saying, like home of figure skating world champion. But it also was like more popular, in her day than it is now. I don't think too many people would actually care that much. She came from a small town too, so it's like, oh, it's their point of pride is that like we raised a figure skating world champion. Following the end of the 1982 season, Elaine actually went on vacation with a friend, and when she came back at the end of the summer, her coaches started commenting on how much weight she had gained and encouraged her to lose a few pounds. Unfortunately, the pressure put on her by her coaches, in addition to the added pressure from her father and the U.S. Federation to train for the 1983 Worlds and the 1984 Olympics, caused her to develop a eating disorder that was characterized by cycles of binging. And this is actually really quite sad. Elaine recalls how once she walked to the corner store to buy a snack and was actually turned away at the counter because her coaches had instructed the clerks at the store to only sell her coffee and tea. And so she ended up driving to another store, buying a pint of ice cream and eating it in the parking lot.
That sounds absolutely crazy. How could like her coach be able to like control what like a store is selling her?
Yeah, that was like the point at which I was like, this is questionable. After the end of her career, her coaches did acknowledge that she was really the first like top skater that they had had. And so because of that, they were kind of driven to push her really hard to prove that they could produce, like a world and Olympic champion. And I feel like you still see that a lot with coaches today who maybe aren't as well known in like the elite figure skating community, and then suddenly have one skater who shoots up the ranks, and they really just like want to put that one skater out there, and as a result, sometimes things like this can happen. And it's just quite unfortunate and kind of speaks to like the politics behind, if you have a coach with a good reputation, you might get scored better and things like that. So
At the end of the day, coaches should care the most about is the state of their athletes and how physically and healthy they are. Like, I understand that, like, reputation and medals and all of that. I guess we see this with the Russian ladies.
you see it with like the US ladies too. I feel like maybe to a lesser extent.
We see it with it, like, basically all of the skaters to some degree. I guess with, like, when I think about it the most, who I'm really seeing it with the most currently is Alyssa Liu.
Yeah, that's exactly who I was thinking of when I was like reading the story. I was like, wow, there are definitely some like parallels there. I mean, Elaine's case is quite an extreme scenario.
Yeah.
Even by those standards, but I mean, it does shed some insight, I think, into the mentality of her coaches. She went on to place second at 1983 Nationals anyway, and she was sent to 1983 Worlds, where she competed in the compulsory figures portion and then withdrew in the middle of the competition, citing her injured foot.
Oh, no.
Yep. So she, unfortunately, was never the strongest competitor in compulsory figures, which caused judges to give her low scores, and she believes that this was compounded by skating politics. In other words, she thought that they were intentionally scoring her lower than what she had merited to prevent her from, getting on the podium. And then she eventually did go to the 1984 Olympics, but she was 13th after the compulsory figures portion, which effectively erased her chance of winning a medal at all, much less winning the gold like she had been expected to do just 2 years previously when she won Worlds. And she actually finished 6th overall at the Olympics, which is not, a terrible result by any, reasonable measure.
Oh, yeah, definitely not.
And she won the bronze medal at 1984 Worlds, which all of us who have watched a post-Olympic Worlds, it can get pretty messy pretty quickly. So the fact that she was able to, pull herself up following what was certainly very disappointing for her at the Olympics is pretty impressive. Unfortunately, her father had continued putting pressure on her during this time to be a figure skating ladies champion, so he actually took away the sports car that she had been given when her results started to slip and she, wasn't as interested in training anymore, and he ended up driving the car himself, which was obviously very upsetting for her. And then following the Olympics, her dad actually called her, and this is a direct quote, a fat, washed-up world champion. And she has not spoken to him since then.
What a terrible father, firstly.
I mean, there's not a lot of, recent interviews with her. I think the most recent that I found that really made headlines was, 20 years ago. But that was still in 1999, and as of then, she was not speaking to her father and had not since, the 1984 Olympics. Definitely some unfortunate family dynamics going on there with the pressure that he put on her to be a champion. And then after the Olympics, she ended up turning professional. So she joined Ice Capades, which was kind of the precursor to Stars on Ice. And they paid her $4,000 a week to star on Ice Capades, which is a big part of the reason why she ended up joining. So although she didn't really want to tour, her parents were going through a divorce at the same time, and she felt that she could use the money. And then, some other people convinced her to, join the tour, because it is a pretty decent amount of money for like an 18-year-old to be making just for skating in some, professional shows.
Yeah.
And later she did admit that she hated the experience of skating in Ice Capades, but I think it's important to remember that Elaine was still competing and performing in a time where skaters could make a decent amount of money skating in shows. It was like a stable career following, competing as an amateur that you don't see anymore necessarily. So when I saw $4,000 a week, I was like, oh my God.
Yeah, that's a lot of money for a skater. I'm like, we're living in days where skaters can't even like afford to like pay their coaching fees, pay for new costumes and all that, but you can get like $4,000 a week to skate in an ice show. I can't imagine that ever happening anymore. I wonder how much people on Stars on Ice gets paid these days.
I highly, highly doubt that the amount that they're paid approaches anywhere close to $4,000 a week.
Oh, definitely not.
And this was $4,000 like in 1984, which is more than that now. I mean, that is just an absurd amount of money. And it was only for like, it wasn't like a year-long thing. They probably toured for like, a couple weeks.
Yeah, $4,000 in 1984 is approximately $10,000 today.
That's crazy. But, it was a different time, especially for, Elaine Zayak kind of not having the best relationship with her father, and then her parents going through a divorce, and her kind of trying to step away from her competitive career. It was probably a sensible choice for her at the time to join Ice Capades, even though later she admitted that she really did not like skating in a tour. And in those days, the line between amateur and professional skating was a lot more firmly drawn than it is today. So after a skater turned professional and was receiving money to skate in shows, they could not come back to amateur competition. But in 1990, the ISU actually reversed that rule and started allowing skaters who had turned pro to come back to competition if it was approved by their federation. And so that's how today you can have, skaters who are skating in Stars on Ice and then also coming back and skating in world championships and what have you. Elaine actually did not come back to skating when that rule was instated. So in 1991, after she had stints both skating in Ice Capades and then working in a restaurant for a time, being a restaurateur and trying to go to college, but then not quite finishing her degree, Elaine rejoined her old coaches and coached part-time. And then she made the decision to return to competitive skating herself. And so Elaine actually competed at the 1994 U.S. Championships 10 years after her last competition at 1984 Worlds. And she was 28 at the time. She landed a triple loop in the competition for the first time in her competitive career, finished fourth, and was actually named as an alternate to the Olympic team.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she actually competed in the same event as like Michelle Kwan, which I feel like is very strange to me to think about, because I imagine them being from completely different eras. And then it's like, no, they actually like competed together. I mean, granted, Michelle Kwan was like, a teenager at the time, and Elaine Zayak was the oldest competitor in the event, but still, it's just like kind of two eras coming together, which I thought was really interesting. But Elaine actually, talked about that experience of competing at the 1994 U.S. Championships and said that, she had skaters coming up to her saying, she was like their inspiration for starting skating. And they had watched her compete, at Worlds and in the Olympics when they were like 8 years old, and she was like, oh my God, I'm actually really old.
Yeah, well, 28 is old in skating terms.
That's like firmly in uncle territory or auntie territory.
When I think about like the 1994 U.S. Nationals, like I wouldn't even like start to think about like Elaine Zayak because of the whole Tanya Harding, Nancy Kerrigan's stuff that's also happened then. But it's nice to hear that like the fact that you had like such a big traumatic event happen at the U.S. Nationals, that something good actually also happened. That like Elaine Zayak was able to like she like made her own choice, like especially since it sounds like her career has been really like dictated by like her coaches and her father and like the expectations of the media and the U.S. Fed, that she like did this one thing for herself and she did really well.
It's always really nice to see skaters who like, seem to be kind of dictated, by what their coaches want them to do or like what their family wants them to do. And then finally they just like are able to kind of regain control of their career and just skate for the sake of like their own enjoyment. I feel like is always super nice. But yeah, it's like, 1994 U.S. Nationals wasn't completely cursed.
It was like 90% cursed, but there's like this 10% like
of a silver lining,
Yeah.
It's like there was a wholesome like story going on. It was just completely overshadowed by everything else that happened there. But you gotta focus on the positive things.
The positive things.
So in her later life, Elaine ended up leaving competitive skating for good after she had a benign tumor removed in 1997. She has been coaching since then, so she works as a coach in Hackensack, New Jersey. She actually coached alongside Peter Burrows, who was her coach, for a while and then ended up leaving and taking some of the students with her, and so now their relationship isn't as good as it used to be, which is pretty unfortunate. And she was also inducted into the U.S. Figure Skating Hall of Fame in 2003 and the Polish American Athlete Hall of Fame. And so definitely rounded out her career in a way that probably most people weren't anticipating following the 1984 Olympics and 1984 Worlds. But she was definitely able to end on her own terms, which is always good to see, especially, in a sport like figure skating where it can be really nebulous and nothing is really guaranteed to you, that she was able to kind of retake the love that had brought her to competitive skating in the first place.
Has any of her students become like top skaters within the US or any other country?
Not like, winning medals at the national level. She does coach at the same rink that Morozov coached at prior to moving back to Russia.
Ah.
Yeah, so Hackensack, New Jersey apparently is a hub of figure skating, which is not the first thing I would think of when I think of New Jersey, but,
What kind of frustrates me, though, is that it seems like she had this eating disorder, but, like, she never really got help for it, and it doesn't seem like it was a high priority for her coaches or for the U.S. Federation.
That's a good point. I actually want to plug a book that was really instrumental in researching this episode. It's Little Girls in Pretty Boxes. It's actually from about 1995. So it is a little bit out of date, but basically it goes into all of the issues that young women in elite sports face, and it focuses primarily on gymnastics and figure skating. So it actually goes into a lot of detail with, how eating disorders are a lot more prevalent in figure skating than people tend to assume, and how, back in the day, the U.S. Figure Skating Association and other federations really did not have a framework in place to help skaters who were dealing with this. And it was the attitude of a lot of coaches, in that time period that, all you have to do is win. And then after you win, you can eat. And that was actually, featured pretty prominently in the book, was like, these very vivid scenes of skaters competing and then immediately just like rushing to like a cookie stand or to like a food booth and just like stuffing themselves. And it was, it's a very, sobering look into kind of the other side of how these sports are seen as just very glamorous and, full of these like perfect like ballerina like figures. And then it's, it turns out to not really be like that at all. And I think, in the present day and age, there's definitely more awareness that stuff like this goes on, but it's still something that, really needs to be addressed. And it's quite sad that Elaine, didn't get the help that she needed at, such a vulnerable age when all of this was going on. And, the pressure was just mounting and mounting on her, and she really didn't have, any healthy way of coping with it. There is some happy news. So actually she married after her competitive career ended, and her son is now a lacrosse goalie who, is quite successful, it seems like. He's pretty young still, like high school age, but yeah, he has been quite successful as a lacrosse player. So, in the end, despite, the tumultuous career and, skating experiences that she had, she did turn out to make a life for herself that she hopefully can be happy with. So
I support her and whatever future she has, and I hope that she is having a better life now than it sounds like she did when she was a competitive skater.
Yeah, it really sounds like she tries to make her students' skating experience smoother than hers was, which, is kind of the flip side to everything that she went through, is that if something positive comes out of it, it's that her students can have,
can learn from her experiences.
Yeah.
And she can learn what not to do as a coach.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you all for listening. We hope to see you again for our next episode.
If you want to get in touch with us, then please feel free to contact us via our website, inthelowpodcast.com, or on Twitter or Tumblr. And you can find our episodes on YouTube, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and Spotify.
If you enjoy the show and want to help support the team, then please consider making a donation to us on our Ko-fi page. And we'd like to give a huge thank you to all the listeners who have contributed to our team thus far. You can find all the links to our social media pages and our Ko-fi on our website.
If you're listening on iTunes, please consider leaving a rating and review if you enjoyed the show. Thanks for listening. This has been Kite
and Yogeeta.
See you soon.
Bye.